Nice to see so many people here at the first MPC session at Eurocrypt 2024. And we're going to have three very interesting talks here in the first session. Maybe the slides for the first talk are already coming up. Fantastic. So, just a reminder quickly that if you have any questions, please wait until after the talk as usual, and then please use the microphones so people can hear you everywhere in the audience. So, let's get started for the first talk, with the first talk, which is about the question if Alice and Bob can guarantee output to Carol. And that's work by Baralon, Eran Omri, and Mutu. And Bar is going to give the talk.
All right, thank you for the introduction. And this is a joint work with Eran Omri and Mutu. And I actually want to start the talk with a question. So I'm going to present two scenarios, two very similar scenarios, and I'm going to ask which of these is possible. So in both scenarios, there are three parties, two of them holding inputs. The inputs are sets, S and T. And the third party is the only party to receive the output, called the output receiving party. And the goal is to let this party learn whether or not the two sets are disjoint. And the only difference between these two scenarios is the domain. So on the left, the domain of the parties, the sets that they are allowed to input, are all sets, all subsets of 1, 2, and 3 of sizes either 1 or 2. And on the right, it's all subsets of 1 through 4 of sizes either 1, 2, or 3. And the question is, can this be done securely against two corruptions, such that if Lisa is honest, then she will always get an output? And I'm going to give you the answer later in the talk, but for now, I'm going to give you a spoiler. Only one of these can actually be done securely. First, I actually want to motivate this question. Why should we care about this? So beside the theoretical motivation, I can give you an... doesn't work? Okay. I want to give you a story. So suppose that some federal agent, health agent, wants to learn if some new disease is emerging in several hospitals. So he goes to all these hospitals, each of them holds some database, and he wants to learn if there is something in common. So this is exactly the set disjointness problem. He wants to learn if there is something that belongs to all databases. However, they're not very keen on giving him the database because this is private data, so they suggest to use an MPC protocol. However, what we want to is to guarantee that the agent always receives the output. And this thing makes things very interesting, because now there's the question of possibility. So is this possible? Classical results from the 80s by Goldach, Mikali, Vigdorson, and Rabin and Benor showed that it is possible if there is an honest majority. However, if there is no honest majority, then the famous result of Cleve showed that, well, there exists some functionality that cannot be computed. However, he assumed that all parties receive the output. In particular, his result does not apply to this setting, called the solitary output setting, where only one party obtains the output. A few years ago, Halevi, Shai, Kushilevitz, Makrianis, and Rabin, well, they coined the term solitary output and also initiated the study of solitary output secure computation, identifying what can be done and what cannot be done in this setting. And they actually provided an impossibility result in this setting. However, the impossibility result does not apply for set disjointness, for any choice of parameters. What they did provide is several positive results for certain parameters. So now I want to show you them. First, if a party can input the empty set, then it's possible to compute it. Notice that this fixes, and inputting the empty set fixes the output. A second setting where it is possible is if all inputs are sets of fixed size k. And again, in the free-party setting, it is possible to compute if a party can input the entire universe that they consider. Again, notice that this means the party can fix the output by choosing this input. However, many interesting set of parameters are not covered by the results, in particular, the two examples I mentioned earlier. So this motivated our work, and we asked the following question. First, for what parameters can set disjointness be securely computed, assuming no honest majority? And we can ask a more general question of what solitary output functionalities can be computed without an honest majority. So this turned out to be quite a challenging question, so we limited ourselves to the following scenario, to the following model. We have three parties, two of them holding inputs, with the output receiving party having no input. We also assume that the output is a single bit. And like I said before, we consider the dishonest majority setting, so at most two can be corrupted. So now I want to tell you about our result. Our first result is a complete characterization for this setting. We completely characterize the set of all solitary output functionalities with Boolean output that can be securely computed. And it's worth noting that our impossibility result can also be extended to the multi-party setting via standard arguments. Given this characterization, we actually also solve the set disjointness problem. And we got some very surprising results. So consider the following scenario for set disjointness. The inputs are subsets of 1 through n, where the sizes of the inputs are between k and n minus k, where k is some number that is at least 1 and strictly less than n over 2. The reason for this inequality is because if k is either 0 or n over 2, then the functionality can be computed by Levi et al. And what we've shown is that this can be securely computed if and only if n is even. So as an example, for what I showed you at the beginning, if n is equal to 3, then it's impossible. If n is equal to 4, then it is possible to compute it. And finally, our last result, we have some positive results in the multi-party setting. Specifically, we show that in the m-party setting, if any set of m minus t plus 1 of the parties can sample their inputs in such a way that the output distribution of the function is fixed, then the functionality can be securely computed against t corruptions. Okay, so with the time I have left, I want to show you our techniques. I will show you only the techniques for the impossibility result, and I will do it with an example for disjointness. So recall the domain here are all subsets of 1, 2, and 3 of sizes either 1 or 2. The output is going to be 1 if and only if the two sets are disjoint. And it's also going to be convenient to look at the matrix associated with this function. So one party chooses a row, the other party chooses a column, and the output receiving party receives the entry in the entry that they chose. And we're going to order the rows and columns according to this ordering. So notice in particular that the matrix is symmetric. Okay, so as a warm-up, before tackling the solitary output setting, I actually want to show you that first, it's impossible to compute this function fairly. So what does it mean? In fairness, there are now only two parties, both of them outputting the same value. And security, we say that the protocol is secure if intuitively, if a party learns the output, then the other party learns the output as well. So at first, this might seem like completely irrelevant to solitary output, where there is no issue of fairness because only one party receives the output, but I'm going to show you that this is very related to the question of solitary output, to the solitary output setting. So I'm going to show you that this is impossible with an argument due to Makrianis. Okay, so suppose we have a secure protocol and consider the following experiment. So first, the inputs of the parties are sampled uniformly at random. And second, we're going to let a party, a party flips it, we let a party flip its output if and only if its input is of size 2. So notice now that the output of the parties may be different, but they satisfy several properties. The first is that the output of a party is equal to 1 with probability 2/3, and this is independent of the other choice of the input of the other party. So just as an example, let's suppose that Marge chose the first column. So when is Homer going to output 1? Well, there are two cases. Either he sees the two ones and he doesn't flip, or he sees one of the two zeros and he does flip. So this is 4 out of 6 possibilities, so the probability is 2/3. And it's very easy to check that the same holds for any other column that March can choose. The second property that the outputs satisfy is that the two values are actually correlated. It's a bit harder to see, but also very easy to verify. And what this tells us is that there must exist some round in which one of the parties sends a lot of information to the other party. Intuitively, this is because at the beginning of the execution, the view of Homer and the view of Marge are completely independent, but at the end they generated the correlated values. So there must be a jump in the information somewhere. And so let's assume that Marge is the one to send all this information to Homer. And so I claim that Homer can actually use this to bias the output of Marge. I'm not going to show you how this is done. This is something called Cleave's argument. It's just, for the sake of the talk, it's just enough to know that this is possible. And after Homer performed this attack, the output of Marge is going to be 1 with probability that is noticeably far away from 2/3. But I claim that this is a contradiction, because recall that the probability that out hat 2 is equal to 1, this probability is 2/3 independently of S, of the input of Homer. So this means that what happens when we go to the ideal world, in the ideal world, the only attack an adversary can do is change its input. But I just said, even if it changes its input, the output of Marge is always going to be 1 with probability 2/3. And in the real world, it's going to be noticeably far away. So it's very easy to distinguish the two worlds. Okay, so this concludes the two-party setting. Now I'm going to show you how we actually sort of lift the argument to the solitary output setting. So we start just like before. There are 3 parties now. S and T are again sampled uniformly at random. And just like before, there must exist a round where a lot of information is revealed. So again, let's assume that Marge is the one to reveal this information. We would like to do the same attack as before, but now there is an issue that there is nothing to bias because only one party obtains the output. So it's not clear how to do this. However, we make the following observation. Notice that the following holds. So out hat prime 2 is equal to out prime 2 if and only if the size of T is equal to 1. So what does any of this mean? Well, out hat prime 2 is what Marge used to output in the two-party setting. In the previous slide, this used to be her output after the attack. But out prime 2 is now actually the output of Lisa after Homer aborts. So this suggests the following attack. Okay, so this is given to Lisa, and this suggests the following attack. We already know how to bias out hat prime 2 by using the same attack as before, as in the two-party setting. But now Lisa has out prime 2, so we're going to let her guess the size of T based on this value. A bit more formally, we let the adversary corrupt both Homer and Lisa, and he will instruct Homer to act just like in the two-party setting. But he will instruct Lisa to act honestly until the end of the execution in order for her to actually obtain out prime 2. And now Lisa is going to make a guess. And it's worth noting that her guess actually depends on whether out hat prime 2 was biased towards 0 or towards 1. To see why, notice that the probability that this value is equal to 1 is the same as the probability that the output of Lisa is different from flip of T, where flip of T is just the indicator of whether we flipped or not. Basically, it's the same information as the size of T. And so if, for example, Homer increased the probability that this event occurs, then we're going to let Lisa guess that the two values are always different. And if Homer decreased the probability, then we're going to let Lisa always guess that the two values are the same. And what we get from that is that the probability that Lisa guesses correctly the output is noticeably larger than 2/3. However, if we go to the ideal world and see what the simulator can do, well, it turns out that the best simulator can guess correctly with probability 2/3. And so we get that in the real world, the adversary has a noticeably larger guessing probability than in the ideal world. And so the functionality cannot be securely computed. Okay, and just as a side note, you might be wondering where it fails for an even n. it actually fails only at the last step. So the entire real-world attack can be carried out, but it turns out that it can be simulated, and the simulator can guess correctly with the same probability. So I want to end the talk with stating our characterization. So just like for the disjointness, it's going to be convenient to look at the matrix associated with the function, and it's also going to be easier to describe when the function cannot be securely computed. And we prove that f cannot be securely computed if and only if there exist two vectors, p and q, satisfying the following. So we want both vectors to be mapped to the all one vectors, one when multiplied from the right and the other when multiplied from the left. And the second condition that we require is that the sum of entries in both vectors is strictly less than 1. And intuitively, what this means, so intuitively, P and Q, the two vectors, encode what are called locking strategies, which is just a way that instructs the party to sample its input and also tells him when to flip. Such that the resulting output distribution, the probability that it's going to output 1, is completely independent of the other party's input. And the second requirement, the bound on the sum, this translates to the fact that the simulator cannot guess correctly as in the real world. So it actually bounds the amount of information that can be gained from the output. Okay, so let me summarize. We considered solitary output functionalities with two inputs, where the output receiving party has no input, and the output is a single bit. And we provide a complete characterization of which of these functionalities can be securely computed against two corruptions, and which of these cannot be computed. And using our characterization, we also completely characterize the set of the family of set disjointness functionalities that can be securely computed in this setting. And I would like to finish with some open problems. So we consider the set disjointness. Another interesting functionality that a lot of people are looking at is set intersection. So now, instead of just receiving one bit of whether the two sets are disjoint, the output is going to be the entire intersection. And we can ask the same question: for what parameters can this functionality be securely computed? But we can ask a more general question, namely about non-Boolean functionalities, where the output is not a single bit. Which of them can be securely computed and which cannot? And finally, what happens in the multi-party setting? So we have some results extending the impossibility results, some positive results, but we basically don't really understand anything, even in the four-party setting for Boolean output functionalities. And that's it. Thank you.
So, are there questions to Bar concerning the result? Yes.
Hi, I'm not exactly sure I understand, like, when there's one party that's receiving the output with no input, why does the dishonest majority setting make sense? Because if say, for instance, Lisa is corrupted, you don't care about output delivery to a corrupted party. But if both the input providing parties are corrupted, what is the computation?
So no, so what we care about is when the output receiving party is corrupted alongside another party. So like I said in the attack, we corrupt both Homer and Lisa. And now we can use Homer to bias the output, but Lisa acts honestly. So she receives it, and now you can attack privacy. You can guess some information about the input of Marge.
Okay, thank you.
Are there more questions? Maybe a quick one from my side. You showed this implication that if you have an attack against fairness, that gives you an attack against solitary output functionalities, right?
Sometimes, yeah.
Okay, sometimes.
Because sometimes you can simulate, right? For disjointness, for example, when n is even, you cannot compute it fairly, but you can still carry out the attack in the real world, but you can simulate it. You can guess with the same probability, and we even show how to securely compute this function.
Okay, thanks. Then let's thank the speaker again. And second speaker of the session, wants to have his slides? Okay. Ah, fantastic. And so the second talk in the session is about constant round simulation secure coin tossing extension with guaranteed output. And this is by Damiano Abram, Jack Derner, Yuvali Shai, and Varun Narayanan. And Damiano is going to give the talk.
Okay. Hi, everybody, and thanks for the introduction. So this talk, this talk is about coin tossing. So we study protocols that implement the functionality FM you see on the slide. It's a very simple functionality. It samples a random string R of m bits, and it outputs it to all the parties. And here, notice, there is no influence of the adversary, not even in the form of selective abort. We care about guaranteed output. And yeah, we studied this in the context of dishonest majority, malicious corruption, and simulation security. So here is important, we don't care about game-based security definitions for coin tossing, we go for simulation security. And yeah, this is a very natural and important question in cryptography. We use public random coins everywhere. But it's also a very hard question to answer. Indeed, since the 80s, due to Clive, we know that protocols of this kind don't exist in the plain model, not even with computational security. So in this paper, we show a new way to get around the impossibility by relying on some old tool that was introduced by the 90s by Bellar et al., then essentially forgot for 10 years, like Hoffens et al. Restarted it in 2006, and since then forgotten again. It's called coin tossing extension. And yeah, this tool was initially studied in the context of coin tossing with abort, and they didn't really realize the connection to guaranteed output. Okay, what is a coin tossing extension protocol? It's a protocol that implements the coin tossing functionality by relying on an auxiliary resource we call the magic button. And this is essentially the same functionality we want to implement, but instead of outputting m random coins, it outputs a small amount. Let's say n, where n is some superlogarithmic function in the security parameter. So just to summarize, the problem is the following. We have a short amount of unbiased random coins, and we want to expand them to a large public amount without leaving any influence to the adversary. And yeah, we call the stretch of this construction the difference between m and n. So how much randomness we produce, in addition to what we get for free. And some of you may ask, why is this interesting? Like, how do we implement this functionality of n? Of course, we cannot rely on an MPC protocol, at least not in the dishonest majority setting due to Clive, but there may be other tools, for instance, physical devices, or the randomness produced by a randomness beacon, or some time-based cryptographic construction. All of these are possible solutions, but they come with some disadvantages. So it's a natural question to ask whether we can generate a small amount of randomness with these tools and then expand them to a larger amount with better security. Okay, let's try to build this construction, and at first it seems an easy problem. We want to expand a small amount of randomness into a large amount. Isn't that what a PRG does? And yeah, why can't we just press the magic button, get this seed, and then output the PRG expansion of this seed? Yeah, maybe this gets some game-based security definition, but not simulation security, because the output of a PRG looks random as long as the seed remains secret. And here, the seed is public. It's the output of the magic button. So in general, there is an issue with entropy. We cannot expect to compress a large string into a small string if the large string is a high entropy. In general, to build this protocol, we need interactions. Another solution that I often hear is random oracles. Yes, this can work, but as soon as you implement the random oracle with a hash function, everything crumbles. You end up with the same issues as the PRG. Okay? So the next solution that usually comes to mind is randomness extractors. So in the two-party case, it would be like this. Alice and Bob communicate simultaneously. They send two random strings, A and B. Then they press the magic button. They get this short seed. And the output is computed by running the extractor with S as a seed and the concatenation of A and B as an entropy source. And yeah, by the security of the extractor, this output is statistically close to random. However, how do we simulate this protocol? we would need some sort of extractor that has some explainability property. It's a tool that is really interesting in hindsight, but so far it hasn't been studied. Specifically, we would like that for every entropy source in some class, there exists an efficient simulator that, given a random output, it simulates the transcript that produces that output. But how do we build this? A possible solution is actually by relying on strong extractors that have logarithmic stretch in the security parameter. Namely, it's a function that on input S as a seed and entropy source X, it outputs S concatenated with some other string Y that is short. It's of length logarithmic in the security parameter. And yeah, you can efficiently invert this by brute forcing for X because Y is short. And this was already noticed by Hoffans et al. In 2006, and from this, indeed, they built a one-round, statistically secure coin tossing extension protocol with logarithmic stretch in the security parameter. And yeah, it's not a big amount. If we want to generate more randomness, we would need to run this protocol again, and we cannot do it in parallel because it's only standalone secure. So the question that we try to answer in this paper is there a constant round coin tossing extension protocol with arbitrary stretch? And at least for computational security, the answer is yes. We came up with many different constructions. The first one, the simplest one, is a two-party protocol that is built from coin tossing with a board. And it's actually a very simple construction. The idea is run the coin tossing with a board, and then XOR the result with the PRGA expansion of the seed produced by the magic button. Yeah, this construction can be extended to the M-party setting, but in order to make it work, we need coin tossing with identifiable aboard, and the number of rounds scales with the number of participants. Also, coin tossing with identifiable aboard can be built from one-way functions in the standalone model, so we immediately get a coin tossing extension protocol in this setting based on one-way functions. Yeah, this is already a good start. This is good, but still, this construction needs more than one round of interaction before generating the randomness. Can we build a one-round construction? And the answer is, again, yes. We present 3 constructions of this kind, all of them with different techniques from the previous ones. One is based on DD8, one on Palier, and one on class groups. It's an M-party protocol, it has only one round, and it achieves security in the UC model, but it relies on some reusable CRS. And this is not amazing, like, can we get rid of the CRS? And again, the answer is yes. This is actually the most interesting result of the paper. We built a coin tossing extension protocol based on LWE with a super polynomial modulo to noise ratio. It's M-party, it has only one round with no CRS. It's UC secure, and even more interestingly, is secure against adaptive corruption. And yeah, I will talk about this last one later in the talk. One last thing, each of these constructions can be viewed as an explainable extractor for some weird class of entropy sources. All these classes are not really natural and interesting, except for the last one. In the last one, we get something that probably can have other applications, but I will explain later. What about statistical security? Here we came up with a lower bound for any protocol that has black box simulation. Specifically, we proved that any R-round coin tossing extension protocol has stretch that is proportional to R times log lambda. So the protocol of Hoffans et al. Is optimal in this setting. Finally, we study a generalization, and we proved that if we have the magic button, not only we are able to generate random unbiased strings of any length, we are also able to generate unbiased samples from any distribution you want. For instance, large RSA moduli of unknown factorization. And to do this, we need only one round, and actually a reusable CRS that is short and unstructured. And yeah, we built this from I/O and a particular flavor of distributed samplers that were introduced at Crypto last year. Okay, so let's build coin tossing extension from LWE. We use 2 tools. The first ingredient is a group G in additive notation that contains a hidden cyclic subgroup H. So the uniform distribution over H is indistinguishable from the uniform distribution over G. The second tool is some sort of lossy trapdoor function where the description of the function is unstructured, so that we can generate it using the magic button. There are two indistinguishable modes of operations. The first one is called the surjective mode. The other one is called the lossy mode. And yeah, if the function is in surjective mode, it outputs random elements in the big group G, whereas when it is in lossy mode, it outputs random elements in the hidden subgroup H. Okay, the small one. And yeah, it's a trapdoor function, so there is a trapdoor that allows us to compute random preimages efficiently. Okay, how do we use this to build coin tossing extension? I will explain it in the two-party setting, but this can be generalized to n parties. So Alice is honest, Bob is corrupt. The parties start by exchanging random elements in the domain of the trapdoor function, xa and xb. Then they call the magic button, and this magic button provides each party with a different trapdoor function, along with this small correction term alpha. The output will be fa of xa plus fb of xb, so we apply the trapdoor functions to the inputs broadcast by the corresponding parties. We sum everything together, and then we add this correction term alpha times h, where h is the generator of the cyclic subgroup. And yeah, we choose alpha so that alpha times h is uniformly random in H. So that's it. Why is this secure? I will explain it by looking at how simulation works. So at simulation time, we pick one honest party, Alice is in our example, and we make the magic button generate its trapdoor function in surjective mode. All other trapdoor functions generated by the magic button will be instead in lossy mode. Now, let's represent the group in this way. There are all these rings. These rings are cosets of H inside G. So we get them by picking any element in G and multiplying by power of H until we end up in the element again. And yeah, let's look now at the output, and we see that there is this sum. Let's pick the first term, fa of xa. Since fa is in surjective mode, fa of xa is a random element in the group. Let's say in that random coset. Now, second term, fb of xb. fb is in lossy mode, so fb of xb belongs to the subgroup H. So when we add it to fa of xa, we move the point somewhere in the group, but we are confined within this coset because we are adding an element in H. So this fa of xa plus fb of xb is not random. The adversary can bias it, but we are still in the random coset chosen by Alice. Finally, there is the correction term, alpha times h. This is a random element in H, so essentially we move again inside the coset, but we are now in a random element of this coset. It's a random element in the random coset chosen by Alice, therefore a random element in G. We removed every bias the adversary introduced with the second term. Yeah, this is great. The only issue is we didn't manage to build these trapdoor functions using groups. We relied on lattice-based cryptography. So our group G will now be a vector space of dimension k plus t, where t is bigger than k, much bigger. And yeah, the hidden subgroup is now a subspace described by a random secret matrix S, as you see on the right. And yeah, specifically, H is composed of all vectors v1, v2, where v2 is S times v1. Okay, when the trapdoor function is in surjective mode, it is described by a random matrix with k plus t rows, and yeah, it's a fat matrix. And when we apply it on some input x, we view x as a discrete Gaussian sample, and we multiply m and x. By the leftover hash lemma, this is statistically close to random in G. What about the lossy mode? In lossy mode, like the function is structured. The first k row are random, it's a matrix M1. The last t rows are instead obtained by multiplying M1 by S and then adding some noise. So under LWE, this looks indistinguishable from the surjective mode. Now, what happens if we apply this function on x? Well, we obtain something that is close in norm to H. So it's y1, and then we have the last t entries that are s times y1 plus some noise. So it's more or less what we want. fa of xa is random, fb of xb is not really in H, but is close in norm to H. The problem is the correction terms, alpha time 8, because now it doesn't even make sense. What is 8? Like, the subgroup 8 is not even cyclic. How do we sample a random element in 8 using a small entropy value alpha? And yeah, actually the solution is not hard. Essentially, in the protocol, we make the magic button produce a random matrix D that has roughly k times log Q rows, and also some discrete Gaussian vector E. And the randomization term will be the product between D and E. At simulations time, we substitute the columns of this matrix D with random vectors that are close in norm to the subspace H. So by multiplying by E, we obtain a random linear combination. And by the leftover hash lemma, this is essentially close in norm to a random element in H. There are some other problems. The first one is, how do we deal with the noise? Well, we just run down the last T entries to a smaller modulo. Then the other issue is that the stretch of this construction at the moment is negative because the description of the trapdoor function is bigger than the output it produces. But yeah, there is a way to get around this by running the protocol L times in parallel, reusing the same trapdoor functions and the same D. Of course, this means that we need to generate many Gaussian vector E1, EL using the magic button, but these are small in size compared to the output size. So in the end, the stretch becomes positive. And finally, the last issue is that the randomness generated by Fn scales linearly in the number of parties because we have a different trapdoor function for each player. And yeah, we solve this using a GSW-based technique, and we make the randomness logarithmic in size in n. And yeah, that's it. Here is a summary of the results, and I want to point out that the LWE-based construction gives us an explainable extractor for the entropy source that generates m blocks of randomness, where one is uniformly random and the other are computed in polynomial time given this xi. And that's it. So thanks.
So, are there questions for Damiano? Also nothing online. I was wondering, because this allows you to some extent to get around impossibility results, are there other implications for other interesting functionalities beyond coin tossing that could be?
I mean, the interesting thing about this work, I think, really is the explainable extractors. Like, we use extractors in cryptography, but we never have a simulation-based definition. Like, this may allow to apply extractors in an MPC context and also being able to, like, simulate the transcript given the output. Like, of course, we don't have a construction that works for any entropy source, or let's say, like, the efficiently computable one, but still, this one is, I think, interesting. It's a direction where to go.
Interesting. Yeah, there's one question.
Yeah.
Please.
So thanks for the talk. So does your simulator need to control the output of the magic box functionality, or the functionality can be, like, global without?
Well, can you repeat? Sorry.
So does the simulator
need
to control the output of the magic box functionality? Does it need to?
Yeah, it controls it. Like,
so it cannot be a global thing that the simulator cannot touch.
No, the simulator controls the outputs. This is crucial because, like in the WE-based construction, we need to generate these trapdoor functions, putting them in lossy mode for the corrupted parties. Like, this is the whole point. And we cannot control that. There is an impossibility.
Probably you would need a CRS in that case.
Yeah, we would need a CRS or something like this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, then let's thank Damiano again. And for the last talk of the session, we're going to hear a bit about two-round maliciously secure oblivious transfer with optimal rate by Pedro Branco, Nicolo Döttling, and Akshayaram Srinivasan. And Pedro is going to give the talk.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to talk about maliciously secure OT with optimal rate. This is joint work with Niku and Akshay. Okay. Yeah, so this talk is about oblivious transfer, so let's start with the definition of OT. OT is a primitive between a receiver with an input bit B and a sender with two input bits M0 and M1. And at the end of the protocol, we want the receiver to get MB. In terms of security, we want that the sender learns nothing about the receiver's input and that the receiver learns nothing about the other message, M1 minus B. And it's well known that OT is a fundamental primitive in cryptography with many applications, and in particular, it's known to be complete for MPC. So the broad question that we ask in this work is how much interaction we need to implement an OT. And it's well known that to implement an OT, we need at least 2 rounds. So this is the first axis on which you can measure interaction, and the second axis on which you can measure interaction is the number of bits exchanged by the parties. And here we can also lower bound the communication by 2 bits per OT. And to see this, think of the insecure protocol, and there we have 2 options. Either the sender sends both M0 and M1 to the receiver, or the receiver sends the bit B to the sender and gets back MB. And in both cases, we need 2 bits to implement the functionality. And there are actually several works that build OT protocols that achieve that asymptotically achieve this communication complexity in 2 rounds from a variety of different assumptions and achieving different levels of security. All of these constructions either only provide semi-honest security or malicious security against one of the parties. In particular, they only provide malicious security against the receiver. So what about fully malicious security, where both parties are malicious? And the focus of this talk is to understand what's the best communication complexity that we can hope to achieve for malicious OT in the minimum number of rounds. But first we have to take a step back and see what's the best we can hope to achieve for a malicious OT. And it's well known that we need at least 2 rounds. But for malicious OT, we actually need 3 bits to be exchanged instead of 2. And the reason for this is that to prove malicious security, we need to prove that there exists a simulator that extracts both the receiver's input when the receiver is malicious and extracts the sender's inputs when the sender is malicious. So this means that the transcript of the protocol needs to be at least as large as the inputs of the parties, which in the case of OT is 3 bits. Otherwise, we'll run into incompressibility issues. So when a malicious OT achieves this communication complexity, then we say that it has optimal rate. So what do we know about malicious OT with optimal rate in 2 rounds? And although this question was never asked explicitly before, we actually know a few things. We know how to build it from LWE, from factoring-based assumptions, assuming a non-reusable CRS, or from LPN in the random oracle model. So the question that we ask in this work is whether we can build malicious 2-round OT with optimal rate with a short and reusable CRS. And we answered this question affirmatively by showing a 2-round batch OT scheme, which is UC secure against malicious adversaries under both QR and the LPN assumption. It has a short and reusable CRS, and the total communication of the protocol approaches 3K bits for K-independent OT executions. So in the next slides, I want to give you a brief overview of our construction and the main ideas behind it. And to build our scheme, we start from an OT from a primitive called trapdoor hash, And this already achieves, the sender's message already achieves optimal size, but the receiver's message is large. But unfortunately for the parameters that we need, the protocol is not sender secure. So we show how to use LPN to obtain sender security while maintaining the sender's message with optimal size. Then we reduce the receiver's message using a primitive called key homomorphic trapdoor hash together with LPN. And because we have used LPN, there will be some LPN errors in the end that will affect the correctness of the protocol, so we need to correct these errors, and we get our protocol. So for this step, where we reduce the receiver's message, we're going to use hybrid encryption via LPN assumption, and this was a technique that was already present in the previous works. So it has become somewhat standard by now, so I'm not going to talk about this today, and instead, I want to show you how we can build a secure OT where the sender's message is of optimal size. And I believe that this is the main novelty of our work. Okay, so one of the main ingredients that we use is a primitive called trapdoor hash functions. And this is a primitive that has a hash algorithm, which allows us to input a vector x. And additionally, it has the following algorithms: a key gen algorithm that takes a function as input and outputs an encoding key and a trapdoor. And then we have two algorithms: an encoding algorithm that takes an encoding key and the vector x, and a decoding algorithm that takes a trapdoor and the hash value. And the point is that these two algorithms are run by different parties, and they allow the parties to get to locally get additive shares of f of x. So this is the correctness property, and for security, the only requirement that we ask is that the encoding key hides the function f. And we know a bunch of instantiations of this primitive from a variety of different assumptions for the class of linear functions. And we know instantiation from DDH, LWE, or QR. And looking ahead, since we're aiming for a malicious security, we're going to need a trapdoor hash with perfect correctness. And the only one that we know from this, the only instantiation that we know that fulfills this property is the one from QR. So this is the one that we're going to use in our work. Okay, so our starting point is an OT scheme from trapdoor hash for linear functions. And here the CRS is composed by a hash key and a uniform vector T. The receiver starts by creating an encoding key with respect to the vector b times t, where b is the choice bit. And the sender will choose a random string r and hashes this string. And additionally, it computes two ciphertexts. To compute these ciphertexts, the sender first computes an encoding of r and masks both messages with this encoding. And additionally, for the second ciphertext, it adds a shift t inner product with r. So the sender sends the hash value and the two ciphertexts to the receiver. And recall that by the correctness of the trapdoor hash, the receiver is able to get an additive share of the value b times t inner product with r. So this means that for the ciphertext WB, the shift will cancel out, and the receiver will be able to get the message MB. On the other hand, for the other ciphertext, the shift will not cancel out, and we can use the leftover hash lemma to argue that the other message will be hidden from the receiver. Okay. So looking at this protocol, the sender's message is still not of optimal size, because the hash value is of poly lambda size, and the W's are just bits. So to make it of optimal size, we simply run a batch of OTs, where the sender reuses the same R across several executions. And now the sender's message is of optimal size because as long as the batch size is much larger than the hash value. Good, but there's a problem. And this is a subtle problem. And the problem is that if we want to rely on the leftover hash lemma, the size of the vectors R and T needs to be much larger than the batch size. And on the other hand, each encoding key of the receiver grows with the size of T. So that means that each encoding key will now grow with the batch size. And this will be a problem later on when we want to reduce the receiver's message. So for there to be any hope to reduce the receiver's message, we need to make L, the size of R and T, much smaller than the batch size. But in this case, we cannot use the LHL, and the protocol is not secure. So instead of using a statistical argument to argue sender security, we need to use a computational argument, and the natural candidate for that is the LPN assumption. And recall that the LPN assumption states that given a uniform matrix T, the vector R times T plus some sparse error vector E is indistinguishable from uniform. And in particular, this matrix T can be expanding. So I can give you as many LPN samples as I want. OK, so consider again a single execution of our protocol. To solve our previous issue, the sender is going to add an error vector to, an error value to both W0 and W1 with some probability. And now we can use the LPN assumption to argue that one of the ciphertexts will be hidden from the receiver. And moreover, since I can give you as many LPN samples as I want, the sender can now reuse R across several executions without having to increase its size. So this means that R and T are now can now be made much smaller than the batch size. OK, so if you have been paying attention, you might have noticed that the sender also sends a hash of R, and this can be seen as a leak on the LPN secret vector. So it might seem that we need some form of entropic LPN, but actually in the paper we show that we can get away with just LPN. Good, so the last issue that we need to solve is correctness. So this protocol is not correct because some of the receiver's outputs will contain LPN errors. So we need to correct these errors. And for that, we're just going to use a general purpose 2PC protocol. And the functionality of this 2PC is a bit involved, but the point is that the communication required for this 2PC will only grow with the Hamming weight of the error vector. So we just have to set the number of errors to be sublinear in the batch size. And the communication overhead of the protocol will be sublinear. So one thing that I haven't mentioned is malicious securities. And in this talk, I'm just going to talk about malicious security against senders. And we get it almost for free via the perfect correctness of the trapdoor hash. The only thing that we need to guarantee is that the hash value sent by the sender is well-formed. But for this, we can again rely on a 2PC. And the communication of this 2PC will grow only with the size of R. But again, the size of R can be made sublinear in the batch size. So the communication overhead is also sublinear. Good. So in this talk, I've showed you how to build a 2-round OT for which the sender's message is of optimal size and which is malicious sender secure. So, and you can check the paper to see how we turn this into a fully malicious protocol with overall optimal rate. And the main insight of our work, in my opinion, is how to use trapdoor hash together with LPN to improve the communication and the security of protocols. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the nice presentation, Pedro. Are there questions in the audience? Yes, you? Can you please go up to the microphone?
By optimal rate, do you mean that it's like
It's
optimal rate was 3 bits per
Yeah.
OT? Like here we have like I see like EK1 up to EKM from the receiver, and then like 2M like W values from the sender. And these are like longer than 1 bit, right?
So each of these Ws is 1 bit.
1 bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the EKs as well. It's all 1 bit.
No, so the EKs, I didn't show you how to reduce the size of EKs.
Ah, okay.
But you can check the paper.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
If there are no other questions, then let's thank Pedro and the other speakers of the session again. And it's now session switching time, so you can go elsewhere or you can stay for a second round of MPC.